We have some new faces with us this morning. Good morning, good morning. Come on over.
Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of The Pitt. I'm David Chen here with Patrick Klepek. Patrick, I want to talk a little bit about the making of the show before we talk about the show real quick.
Mm-hmm.
You may or may not be aware that the estate of Michael Crichton filed a lawsuit against this show because she claimed, Sherry Crichton, the widow of ER creator Michael Crichton, claimed that The Pitt was just a sequel to ER that they had not negotiated the rights for and therefore had not credited Michael Crichton with creating ER and all this stuff. And the creators of The Pitt have strenuously defended that this show is a different show. According to a filing, The Pitt is a completely different show from ER. The plaintiff cannot use Mr. Crichton's ER contract as a speech-stifling weapon to prevent defendants from ever making a show about emergency medicine, end quote. I thought that was a funny line from the lawsuit. Also, there's a motion to dismiss, and they said The Pitt is not a derivative work, and it would be absurd to interpret the ER agreement as prohibiting Warner Brothers Television from ever again making a medical drama about emergency medicine without Mr. Crichton's consent, end quote. They also point out that there have been multiple examples of other emergency TV shows, emergency medicine TV shows, and so on that have been made without people being sued. And they pointed out that even with like actors that have appeared in them, they pointed out that George Clooney starred in a show called E/R before he appeared in the show ER. Do you remember this?
I don't. I feel like you're making that up.
E/R is an American sitcom that aired on CBS from September to February of 1984, 1985. And it's set in the emergency room, the I'm saying E/R because to distinguish it from ER, of a fictional Clark Street Hospital in Chicago, Illinois.
Oh, wow.
And George Clooney was a character on the show. Basically, they're saying, hey, there's many examples of actors appearing in other shows about emergency medicine that haven't been sued.
David, there is no world, none, 0% chance that this show from creatives that worked on ER, bringing in one of the main stars of ER, making another medical drama that I didn't watch ER, but I've read up on it since, that ends in an open-ended fashion where this character, one of the main characters of ER, could have come back as the grizzled old veteran because the arc of ER is that he is the youngster that doesn't know anything and is scared and then becomes a veteran by the end. And then let's see what he's up to years later. This show was conceived as a sequel to ER. Negotiations fell apart with the Crichton estate, and so they reshuffled into something else. And then now the lawyers are working it out. Like, I'm unwilling. We'll get into what I think about the show. That's irrespective of this was. Of course, you would have made a sequel to ER if you could have. They couldn't, so they made The Pitt instead.
So they made something else. But I do having watched ER and the show, I do think it's sufficiently different to not be an ER sequel. All that said, you're right. It could easily have been. All that said, Patrick Klepek, let's talk about that's the kind of sordid history of how this show came to be. What did you actually think of The Pitt streaming right now on Max?
We've watched the first 2 episodes.
Yes.
I think it's fantastic.
Wow.
I'm not I have no history with ER other than awareness in the pop culture. Not like a medical drama person at all. Like it's not like a style of storytelling that I find myself drawn to. So I was interested to watch the show just to see how I reacted to it, like what I took from it. And short version, high recommend. I think this show is great. I am very excited to see where it goes, but it falls in line with the evolution of me personally, which is like my dad passing, becoming a father. I just love sappy, like sad stories about families. Like I just want to cry, like with a tragedy with a family.
Yeah.
That just seems like a thing I'd like to do. And you know what? The Pitt seems like it's gonna be full of them. And so I'm having a great. The show is very tense and upsetting, but I'm having a great time with The Pitt. I think the real time format works reasonably well so far. I'm sure we'll get into that, but big 2 thumbs up from me so far. I think The Pitt is great.
Wow, I'm shocked, especially because now I'm like, you definitely should go back and watch ER because that show
That's
is
too many
gra-
seasons. I'm committed.
groundbreaking.
I'm going to watch the Pit instead.
Yeah. This ER would be a good lunch show, Patrick, for you.
I've
Anyway,
heard Alan Sepinwall, one of my favorite critics,
yeah.
who gave a glowing review to this as well. Like Finn in his newsletter has been chronicling doing a treadmill rewatch.
Yes,
of
that's right.
ER.
The treadmill rewatch of ER, and it's very good. And I'll talk a little bit about this later, but yeah, I rewatched the first episode of ER after this just to kind of compare. And
I thought about it because it was like the first thing
it
that Max
automatically serves it up.
recommends
It
when you
serves it up to
finish
you,
the second
right.
episode. It's like, you want to watch like 1,000 episodes
You should,
of ER?
you should at least watch the pilot because it's incredible what they were able to achieve on network television at that
Sure.
time, with the pilot. Okay, all that said, like if you can't tell, I have a like deep respect for ER.
Mhm.
I watched many seasons of the show. Loved the show. Anyway.
ER is also set in Chicago. So a lot of this stuff is set in my backyard.
All right, my thoughts on the Pit. Overall, I like the show. I think it's really interesting, and it's very, in my opinion, it's quite different from ER. There's obviously the real time format, but also you really get to know each one of these cases. Like each case is like a miniature morality play, basically. Like a case comes in and it's like they're like, oh, so and so's coming in and they're vomiting all over the place. We don't know what's going on, and so it's like the doctors need to solve a puzzle, basically. Like every case is like a puzzle that needs to be solved. And by the way, each one has some kind of lesson about society in some way.
Is that how ER was structured?
No, not really.
Okay.
And the thing about ER it was mostly I would say that ER was more focused on the doctors.
Like the personal drama, like between
the personal
the doctors?
drama of the doctor. Now there would be really compelling cases that came through. Like there's an incredible episode with Bradley Whitford called "Love's Labor Lost." That's like about like this one case and like how it progresses, and you can imagine based on the title like how tragic it ends up being. But so many of the cases do have some kind of like some takeaway, but I would say the Pit, like every single one is like there's some lesson in here for what this is trying to teach you. And I would say as a result, it feels very didactic, this show. Not necessarily in a bad way. The thing is, I love everything it's trying to do. I think we need to understand how bad the nursing shortage is in the United States. I think we need to understand as a society how bad burnout is for doctors after they went through the COVID-19 pandemic. I think we need to understand how we need to pay people a living wage in these situations, and how people from minority groups are often treated poorly in these environments. Like,
why do you wait 12 hours to get into the emergency room?
Exactly. Like I support everything this show is trying to say. And also, as a result, sometimes it can be a little bit boring because it's trying to, it's very didactic. It's trying to teach lessons, and I love every single one of those lessons. But it's not as exciting as a show like ER as a result of that. Right?
I wonder if that's tone setting, right? Like
the
first two, like this is a 15 episode season, right? So you could conceive like most like prestige shows we get these days are 8 to 10. So 15 is a long season.
Yeah,
and so
I love it.
And I think it's not unsurprising for a company to release like a streamer to release 2 episodes, but in this case, it almost feels like it's a full pilot. Like the second episode ends in a place where it feels like this is the show. Like here is the shape of the show. Now we're going to go from here. A question to you I have, because I think you're more familiar with these shows than I am. Like just as an outside observer, it feels like the era of like the hospital shows that dominated the culture. There's ER, and then there's House, and then there hasn't really been anything since. House being much more of a puzzle box show. Like here is a like diagnosis of the week to unpack with a bunch like a central group of doctors that you get to know on a week to week basis. ER, a much more like broad scope like hospital drama of the hospital, whereas like House is like very focused on a specific set of characters that just also happen to be set like in a hospital. Is that like a fair assessment?
I don't think it's fair because I
Okay.
think there's like a shit ton more shows than you're thinking of. But the biggest one I would say is Grey's Anatomy, which is still on the air.
Fair.
So let's talk about some of the aspects of the show that make it special. I'll say one last thing about the Pitt overall, which is that I think the thing I don't think is great about the Pitt is I don't think the Doctor characters are particularly memorable at this moment. Maybe as time goes on, they'll be, I'll come around on the cast. But again, I watched the premiere of ER right after this, and it's like you got Eric LaSalle, right? Anthony Green. Anthony Edwards, I should say, who plays Dr. Green. Juliana Margulies. Like, these are like George Clooney. Like, that's who's in the pilot of ER. It's like any single one of those people could carry an entire show, and they're all in ER. And it's like, Noah Wiley's great. I don't think he's bad or anything, but it's just like the cast. I'm not like, oh, I'm super invested in the lives of.
But he's
these
also clearly
characters.
the main character, and based on what you're telling me, ER is a rotating cast of main characters. Or does it have a primary anchor in the way that this show?
Dr. Green is kind of the primary. He's like the headline actor. He's like the main star of the show. But
the Pitt just like basically follow. I mean, it does. We do split off, but like really, it's like we're following Noah Wiley over the course of these 2 episodes.
Right. But I think for a show like this to really work, you need to be kind of invested in these
everyone else
characters' lives. Right.
Yeah.
And we learn enough about them to understand, like, the show wants us to be invested in their lives. There's the nurse who has the ankle monitor, and there's the medical student who's poor and who's coming up, and he's the first person in his family to have gone to medical school. And there's
one of them is having morning sickness. I can't imagine that's not going to cause a problem in the middle of a case at some point.
Right, exactly. You know, like all these details about all these doctors and the med school students, and so like the show wants you to invest, but I think I'm not that invested in any of them yet. And I think
I'm a little more invested than you because I don't have the hangups of ER on me.
Maybe
that's not to say that this show is that ER isn't better. My guess is that
it's different. It's different,
but I think I'm also there's a novelty to the Pitt that you can't have because you're invested more in the genre, in like this subgenre of storytelling in which this is brand new to me. So there's a bit of the Pitt that I think hits a little harder because there's a novelty factor to not having watched a lot of this before.
This is basically like one of your first medical dramas that you've ever seen,
much.
Right?
I like outside of like film, like I'm sure I've watched plenty of films with medical storylines, but I've not watched a serialized television show about a hospital before. So there is certainly, I think, take that into account when you listen to my responses, or rather take that as a point of encouragement that if you haven't watched one of these, like, this is a great place to start. And the idea that like you can watch 15 episodes of this and then just flick over to a billion hours of ER is a encouraging place to be.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love that. I'm introducing you to, I'm broadening your horizons, Patrick Klepek, and I love that. I'm going to say this, Patrick. I'll say I think the show can work even without a cast that you're really invested in, like, or without characters you're really invested in, because like it's really about the cases. Like, there's a nonstop flow of cases into this ER, and each one is really interesting in some way. And so like, even if the characters were nothings, like like Law and Order, right? Like, you don't really care about those characters. The cases are interesting enough to drive it. I'm just like, in my opinion, you need like really compelling characters to be in medical drama, but maybe you don't, and we'll see if the Pitt proves that out. One of the components of the show that is unique is the real-time component of it, that this show starts at 7 a.m. We're going to go through a 15-hour shift. There's going to be 15 episodes of the show. I wanted to talk a little bit about what I thought about the real-time thing, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts. I did not find it to be particularly compelling. With 24, the other major real-time show that we've seen, there's literally a ticking time bomb. It's like the bomb's going to go off in 6 hours, and if you don't track the terrorist down, the bomb's going to go. All this stuff, and there's a really like plot-motivated reason why you want it to be in real time.
Also, they cut at like the commercial breaks. Like, part of the iconic part of
show
24
you the ticking clock.
is a tick, tick. Like, you're reminded where you're at in the real-time aspect all the time. The show is constantly telling you where you're at in the hour.
with the Pit, it's kind of a cool idea of, oh wow, every hour is going to be a real time hour uh in a shift, and there is some cool stuff that happens within that. So, for instance, there's a character, I think Mr. Milton is his name, who comes in and he has like some chest pains, but he's like totally fine. And so this guy who's like one of the younger workers at the hospital, he says, "Oh yeah, you have a gallstone. Like, don't worry about it. You're fine." And then literally by the end of episode 2, that character is dead. He I presumably has had a heart attack or some kind of cardiac issue. It's like, hey, how long? When did you last talk to him? He's like, I checked in on him 30 minutes ago. And it's like, oh wow, you realize like, oh, if somebody had helped him 30 minutes ago, he would have lived, right? And there's something about, oh, you just missed that moment. And that's kind of a cool idea of like what the real time thing can do for you. But then there's other times when it actually doesn't make any sense at all. So, for instance, just number one, the sheer volume of cases. Like, I don't believe a real ER would like have this many cases in real time, or this many interesting cases in real time as this show does. And then the other thing is like, remember, there's the Noah Wiley's character has kind of this supervisor character who comes in, and one of the characters is a homeless, unhoused man, and they cut off his outfit, and he has rats that escape, right? And then literally like 5 minutes later, the supervisor comes in and is like, "Please don't tell me we have rats. Did you call the exterminator?" It's like, lady, it literally happened 5 minutes ago. Like, there's no reason you should be asking that. Like, they're literally just comprehending what actually happened right now. So there's parts where the real time thing, doesn't make it. And then and then there's also this other subplot where there's basically a kid whose mom, he brings in his mom, and the dynamic between them is really weird, which I thought was like a very cool subplot. Like, I'm just like, yeah, this is really odd, this whole subplot. And you find out that the mom actually ingested something to make herself throw up so that the kid would bring her in so that she could get her kid help, because she didn't want to call the police on him. But he is presumably going to shoot up a school. And Noah Wiley like chases him out the door. It's very comical and not very like, I thought it was kind of silly where he's chasing this kid out the door. And I think
going
like,
right past guards that could just grab him, like if you needed help.
I think in 6 hours, like in 6 episodes from now, there's going to be like a school shooting in the show, and the ER is going to have to, the hospital is going to have to deal with that. And so, I found myself more distracted by the real time thing than like really embracing it. I know that was very lengthy, Patrick. What did you think of the real time component? Did it work for you at all in any way?
It worked, but also I wasn't thinking about it, I guess is what I'll say. Like I think there's a really important distinction, as we pointed out with 24, which is that 24 is reminding you where you're at on the clock at all times.
Yeah.
And here there is hour 1, like hour 2, like, or however it presents it at the beginning of the episode. And other than context clues, like through conversation, the show isn't reminding you what time it is, like where you're at in the day. You're just sort of kind of supposed to pick up on it. One thing I do like, and something the show has done so far with it that I think is interesting, is that some of the storylines are determined by the time of day. Like, there is an elderly person that comes in because, hey, at the beginning of the morning, like at the different elderly care nursing homes, like they're doing their rounds, checking the beds. And there's like one of the doctors says, like, you can pretty much set your clock. Like at this time, like we're gonna get a call, someone's gonna come in, and they're probably dead, or there's very little you can do to help. You have the show opens like very early in the morning, I think between like 6 or 7 a.m., something like that.
7 a.m. to 8 a.m. is the first hour.
And you have folks that were out the night before drinking, like like people who were drank to excess, somebody that got in a bar fight and lost a tooth, and so. There's a woman that burns her hand, and she's really concerned about getting her kids to school on time. And so those are kind of interesting little stressors, like that I think the show could use to its advantage, where it's like I would be far less interested in a show that was like had a clock that it's reminding me about all the time.
Right.
In so much as where I think the show, if it does it well, it's more that like there's something that I listened to the Slash Filmcast all out of order, because I only listen to the episodes when I've watched the film that you all discuss, so I can listen to the spoiler section. And so I don't know when you talked about this, but there was at one point recently where the three of you discussed a book that is like reports out all the stories that could happen in a day.
Yes.
Do you remember what that book is called? So people, like,
yes.
I wanted to read it after you mentioned it.
It's called One Day: The Extraordinary Story of an Ordinary 24 Hours in America by Gene Weingarten. Incredible book. Incredible
Right.
book.
And so there's something to that here, like where the pit at its best
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
rather than, and so I kind of hope the school shooting doesn't happen because like I think this show, like what I've really enjoyed so far is the unordinary nature of the extraordinary things that happen in a place like this.
You
And
mean
so
the ordinary nature? Like
the
I think you're
ordinary
saying,
nature. Well,
yeah,
like
yeah.
the extraordinary, like is ordinary, right? Like you're watching these people do,
Yeah.
like, you know, someone's been degloved, where like, you know, like the skin has been ripped off of their, you know, foot. Like it's horrible. Like shit happens every day, and like that seems shocking to me, but to everyone, you know. So
Right.
I think there could be a really compelling show that is just about that for 15 episodes.
Yeah.
I strongly suspect. I feel like if there were betting odds on that being a school shooting, but if it's not a school shooting, something dramatic is going to happen.
He's going to stab 5 people or something like that.
Something is going to happen that
Yeah.
like puts everyone. I feel like they left there's a moment in one of the episodes where they're able to like shift one of the rooms to be an OR. I'm like, well, what happens if you needed more of those? Like, well, we just figure it out. And I feel like that's the show just like dropping in. Like, well, at some point we're gonna have to do something dramatic. But I guess to end the point, it's working for me. But because the show isn't reminding, like, it's not hitting me over the head with the time aspect. I have enjoyed that it's like, oh, we're at like 8 o'clock. Like, sure. Like, what are people doing in their lives now? Somebody being on an e-bike trying to get to work or to school, and they get, I hate the term doored, but as someone that bikes a lot, I'm well aware of it. I like that part of the pit.
Yeah, that's a great point, Patrick. That we're seeing like a full cycle and what it involves. And I think you're saying you don't want to see something weird and super external happen.
What happens at
you know,
lunchtime?
right,
Like,
what happens at lunch?
you start thinking about like what happens in society at lunchtime that would then make all sorts of different sort of accidents and things appear. And I think that's neat in and of itself.
I think it's also interesting that you get to see cases resolved over multiple episodes. Like so far, the 2 episodes we've seen, like there's something that starts in episode 1, and it's not like by the end of episode 1, there's a clean and neat, tidy solution to it. Like you might need to wait 2 to 3 hours, which just like in normal human life, right? Like that's how it would work. So that's also an interesting component of it. Is like the pace. I do think the pace at which they're increasing cases is really high. Like, but I think that's what you need for a show like this to stay interesting over multiple episodes.
And I assume, like, especially early on, it's like we're introducing a ton, so we can like have a bunch, like, the young doctor who like loses a patient because he didn't check up on him over the course of 30 minutes. Well, I assume even after that, he goes to the morgue, the body is no longer in the ER. We're going to be dealing with like the trauma of having lost a patient. So I think it's okay for the show to shotgun us up front, because like it gives it a lot to kind of juggle with as they kind of, because I think that's a huge part of this show. I don't know how much this is relevant in ER or, Grey's Anatomy, but like there's a whole lot of like, well, you got to put you have to process your emotions, but you got to also put them on hold because there's 9 other people you got to help. And I imagine that's going to be a huge part of the show as it goes forward, is just how you do or don't compartmentalize yourself, as your entire job is to help others.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about some of the specific cases, Patrick Klepek. I'm just curious if any of these resonated with you, right? We already talked about the school shooter, serial killer guy. I don't think that's going to be not necessarily my favorite plot, but I loved how these 2 characters come in and there's just really odd dynamic between. It's like just really strange. And I love that the show was able to bring that out with these actors that were in it. There's Mr. Milton, the guy who comes to the chest pain. There's this sleeping boy who comes in, and it's unclear like why he's sleeping. Why can't he wake up? By the way, I'm just gonna say I know I don't like to like. I'm gonna say I was not entirely convinced by that boy's sleeping performance. I'm gonna put that out there. I was not convinced he was actually.
I can't imagine telling a child that young to stay still.
Yeah.
Like if there is a behind the scenes featurette on that sequence, it's so you'd have no idea how many times we had to cut away from that fucking kid.
Yeah.
Like that's just like I know that is a 4 or 5 year old boy. I don't know if they say the age, but like I have a 4-year-old. If you ask them to act like a corpse, you were getting 10 seconds, like, at best.
Yeah, and you can imagine they're doing many takes where he's right there in the shot. Anyway, okay. There is a 23-year-old guy who is doored while he's riding a
Ugh.
stand-up scooter, and I think his face gets all messed up. Is that the same guy, right?
Yes,
The guy with the
yes.
Lafort fracture?
Yeah.
There is a father with Alzheimer's who comes in with pneumonia, and his children decide to put him on a breathing machine against his wishes. And there is the woman who it falls or is pushed off of a subway platform and basically gets her foot torn off. So these are some of the cases. Were there any ones that kind of stuck with you, Patrick Klepek?
The one with the parents and the kid. So this was like,
Yeah.
as I was starting to realize, I was like, oh, like this show is going to get me. I bet there's going to be a ton of stuff like this in the show. Because I mean, that is a rip from the headlines, sort of like that has happened a bunch of times.
So if it turns out the kid has ingested cannabis by accident.
Yeah,
right?
he found like little gummies that taste like candy that were in his dad's pocket from a trip he had gone on with his brother-in-law, and like, I'm not gonna call it. I would call it a common occurrence. Like if you were to do a Google search, you would find many headlines of like this happening. It's like a huge problem. In fact, there's it wasn't gummies, but an extended family member. This is many moons ago. I heard a story where like when their kids and friends' kids are very young, in their basement, very common, like you might have a second refrigerator, and like the second refrigerator where the kids all play is just for stuff for the kids, like water, juice, soda, things of that nature. And somebody absentmindedly put down like a 6-pack of Mike's Hard Lemonade down there. And Mike's Hard Lemonade is very sweet, you don't taste the alcohol. And like a 4-year-old got into one of those because it's a screw off cap. They managed to get it off, drink it. They came down. The kid was passed out, and they freaked out, and then they realized what happened, and they called poison control, and they're like, well, I mean, there's not like we put ages on when you should drink, but like the body, she's just drunk. Like it's like overnight, she's going to wake up with a headache, like give her lots of water, but like she'll be okay. And so I'm familiar with a similar sort of story in my life to that. And so I saw a lot of that in the show, but any of the stuff with the family, like kids, elderly family members, like those are the ones that seem to be getting to me the most. And I suspect there will be plenty of those over the course of 15 episodes.
Absolutely. I think the one with the Alzheimer's dad is particularly heartbreaking because I think the decision that they make in that situation on the show, it sounds very unreasonable, but that decision that they make is one that thousands of people make across this country all the time.
I don't think it's like, I actually don't think it's I think it's wrong. But that
absolutely.
Me viewer, very easy to take. Like, I think they actually do, like, they do a decent job of trying to balance the two viewpoints, even though we're erring on the side of the doctors as these authority figures and we get more time with them. But, you know, I haven't been in that situation specifically, but I have lost like a family member, and I have had conversations with like my mom and my brother, like over like how we would handle things like that. And boy, there's a reason you have that written down. So the whole point is that you don't have to retreat. You don't have to make a decision, but it broke my heart to watch all that play out.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, these kids basically decide to put their father on a breathing machine or breathing tube, right? To have him intubated. And as Noah Wiley's character makes clear, it's going to be incredibly painful. It's going to be incredibly uncomfortable. He probably won't even understand what's happening. And it will prolong his life at great cost to him. And also it's against his wishes.
They describe it as torture. Like you will keep your father alive in a torturous fashion so that you can resolve your emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, yeah, it's really upsetting. You know, like I'm just going to put this, you know, I would never, I know, I'll just say I would never allow my parents to be in that situation. You know, like what I mean is I would never not follow that personally, but like
I agree with you.
yeah.
Also, like, it's so easy to say that until you're in. Like, I'm with you. Like, I also like. I feel like that's what
I'm saying with
what
100% certainty. Like, there's
I
no.
do believe you. So okay,
Yeah,
here's
you
what I say.
believe me, right?
I'd
don't,
say
yeah.
if
that's
we were
right.
if there were 100 people lined up and one
Yes.
of them was David Chen,
Yeah.
I believe David Chen. But
Yeah,
I think
I would
part
be
of what
the
the show
one.
is getting at is I think
Yes,
for
that's right.
most people they'd be able to sit with you at dinner and say, like, of course, like I'm going to follow
Right.
what we've all agreed.
Right.
But when it's in front of you and you can make a choice and the doctor can't say with 100%
Yeah.
like definitive, like, you know, XYZ, it's going to introduce a wrinkle of doubt. And so I deep empathy for the terrible decision that they make, because I think it is a reasonable, unreasonable decision.
The show does a good job of making it seem reasonable. I would agree with you about that. I think, like, David Chen, I'm just like a strong believer in quality of life as well. Like, like this is something that I've just as a personal belief have for a very long time, that like there's some points at which life, if a person believes this, that life is not worth continuing if the quality of life is not high enough. And I just strongly believe that. And so for me, like, the decision they make in the show is unimaginable to me. Like, I would never allow that to occur. And it's like a deep core thing with my being. That said, I do agree with you, Patrick. As I started this by saying, I know thousands of people make this decision every day or every week,
and they're not monsters, right? And I think that's what the show tries to illustrate between the brother and the sister.
Yeah,
like,
they're misguided.
Yes,
you know, and they end up inflicting lots of suffering on people. But yeah, it's anyway. So, and I love that the show is tackling stuff like, you know, these are like real, actual, relevant things that people are encountering in real life. So yeah, I also want to say that we get some flashbacks. Like, there's a whole, in my opinion, kind of overwrought thing where Noah Wiley's character doesn't want to work on this day because it's the day when his mentor died, right? And we get flashbacks to what his life was like back in the COVID-19 era. He's wearing like a biohazard suit. The emergency room or the hospital is just full of people, like unbelievable amounts of people. And I think that I really appreciate the show tackling this in any meaningful extent. I think we as a society have done very little to reckon with COVID-19. There's no like my I've been doing a lot of thinking and reading about this topic, and I think like people I think as Chris Hayes recently said on Blue Sky that like for many people COVID-19 was the first instance where we were put in a position where we had to think collectively for once. And for many people, they decided, I never want to do that again. Like, that sucked. I never want to do that again. And by the way, can we please never think about that or talk about it anymore? And I think that's what a lot of society has done. And in particular, we subjected our medical system and our doctors and our nurses and all that to like immense strain and trauma. And no one talks about it. You know, no one is acknowledging it. There's no memorials to COVID-19 victims. We didn't do anything to fundamentally change the system at all since COVID-19. We had an opportunity. We didn't do anything to change the system. And now they're literally murdering healthcare CEOs on streets, and people are cheering for it. Like, it's clearly something that we as a society like have deeply on our minds, but it feels like no one's even working on solving anything. And so for the show to at least acknowledge that, hey, this really sucked for doctors, I really admire that.
Every generation, like as you get older, you have different sort of like the kind of like, you know, when like my parents, like you talk about like the Challenger explosion or something, like there are like landmark moments across your life that define the era that you lived in. When I was younger, it was, you know, in high school, it was 9/11. I would say like there were many big things that happened in between then, but like the kinds of like era defining, lifetime defining things, like it's probably 9/11 and then it's COVID-19, like in terms of like how I would think about those milestone events. In the wake of 9/11, we got so much media that helped us or helped me work through different viewpoints on the events that occurred on that day, the consequences of the military
Yeah.
decisions
Yeah.
that were like, there's a lot of interesting television, film, documentaries that examined what happened before, during, and after that were a way of trying to work through as a society what happened on 9/11, like as a culminative event. COVID, I understood and have understood why like different TV shows like either like ignored it entirely,
Yeah.
kind of barely touched upon it, but we have not seen, and at this point, I sort of think we're not going to get
Yeah.
any sort of cultural reckoning
Yeah.
or look at this era in our lives that you couldn't not get the budget to make a 9/11 film like for basically a whole decade after that event. And COVID feels like
I wouldn't describe it like that. I wouldn't put it that. I wouldn't go that far, but I agree with you that there was.
it felt like there was a
ton of-
lot. It just
There's
felt
movies.
like
There's Fahrenheit 9/11. Oliver Stone made a movie. You know, like there's tons of 9/11 content. Remember Me with Robert Pattinson. You know, like there's tons of 9/11 stuff out there, and there's just not as much COVID. And I think people don't want to think about it. You know, it's not. It doesn't sell. It doesn't sell. And I understand like. Why there's not been much stuff, but a lot of people died. You know, more people died in during COVID-19 than during the Civil War, right? And it's like it's odd that we've kind of memory hold it already. And I'm glad the show is saying, hey, actually, this had a profound impact on some people, the people that you rely on to keep you alive. It had a profound impact on them, and I appreciate that. So, I think, like I said, the show is very didactic. It's very lesson-y. It's very like, hey, notice how the person with sickle cell is not treated well because they're black and because people don't understand sickle cell very well. You know, like, and I support all that. I support all that. Sometimes doesn't make for like the most compelling viewing as a drama. But overall, I'm a big fan of the show.
I found a lot in this show, even though I don't have a history with sort of this subgenre.
Yeah.
That would be my recommendation. Even if you never watched something like this before, it's worth giving this one a shot.
I do think it's very different from ER. It actually feels to me more like House, where like they're trying to solve these different puzzles, and also with a social justice streak. It's like if House was woke, basically. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.